بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I thank the MC for that introduction. And inshallah, I will be presenting or moderating the next session, and that is session number 3 concerning regulation, sustainability and Islamic finance. So we will also be looking at aspects concerning the law governing the various structures within the South African context. We have 3 or 5 panelists that will be presenting, and I will call them up one by one. Firstly, I call upon Mr. Shreelin Naicker. You can come to the stage. I then call Moulana, Bilal, Jakhura. Shukran. And Sheikh Dr. Saeed, Mikail. Shukran. Then Maheerah, Gamieldien, Mohamed. And finally, Mr. Shahid Daniels. Shukran. These personalities are all experts within their fields, specific field within the South African context. And inshallah, through this part of the proceedings, I will have a bit of more interaction with the actual delegates here today. The proceedings, as far as my moderations are concerned, is that I'll give a brief introduction to the 5 panelists. Thereafter, I will give each and every one of them 11 minutes to give their presentations that will be made available also on the screens. Immediately thereafter, I will open up for 10 to 15 minutes for any questions by the floor and ending off with final comments by the panelists. So inshallah, I will just start off with the introduction. Mr. Shreelin Naicker is the departmental head of OTC derivatives and insurance at FSCA. He has worked in investment banking for Rand Merchant Bank and Barclays before joining the hedge fund industry. He has a master's in finance degree and a BSc mathematics computer science degree. He also presents the FSCA on the JSE Sustainability Advisory Committee and is a member of the Intergovernmental Sustainable Finance Working Group. That is Mr. Shreelin Naicker. On his left, that is now Moulana Bilal Jakhura. He is the director of the Center of Islamic Economics and Finance, South Africa. His educational qualification and achievements are a number, and all in his CV. I will mention a few. He's an Islamic scholar and alim. We completed from Madrasa Hamadiya and Ta'aleem. He has a BCom in Bachelor's Accounting and Auditing from UNISA, an MBA GSP UCT research paper on the South African Sovereign Sukuk, a certificate in Islamic Professional Accountant. He served as a member of the National Treasury Committee for the introduction of legislation to accommodate Islamic financial instruments in South Africa. He's part of the establishment of an Islamic banking window for Tropical Bank Uganda, and so forth and so forth. His full CV is on the website as well. To his left is Sheikh Dr. Saeed Mikail. He is currently a researcher at the ISRA Research Management Center of UNICEF Group and a lecturer in UNICEF University. He is a registered Sharia advisor with Securities Commission of Malaysia. His areas of specialization include Islamic finance, Islamic social finance, comparative laws, and Islamic private equity and venture capital. His publications focus on Sharia issues in Islamic finance, Islamic legal theory, Islamic private equity and venture capital, Islamic entrepreneurship, comparative law, zakat, waqf, and so forth, and so forth. His CV is also on the website. To his left is Maheerah Gamieldien Mohamed. She is the Managing Director of World One Enterprises. This is the second startup in the e-commerce sector, specializing in smart home and consumer electronics for everyday use. As part of the entrepreneurship journey, she runs a business consultancy and Halal research and advisory consultancy. She also shares her thoughts online through articles when something sparks interest, which she would periodically upload. She has a master's degree in public history from the University of the Western Cape and an honors degree in international relations and a minor in Islamic revealed knowledge from the Islamic University of Malaysia. And at the end, we have Mr. Shahid Daniels, who is a chartered accountant. A professional accountant, is a certified business advisor. He's a chief executive of South African Institute of Professional Accountants. He is a highly experienced accountancy professional, having successfully held numerous leadership positions in corporate, non-governmental, and professional organizations. And his CV also goes on and on and on. That being said, with those brief introductions, I now hand over to the first panelist, that is now Mr. Shreelin Naicker, and he has 11 minutes, inshallah, to give over his presentation. Shukran.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor and privilege to speak at this conference. I represent the Deputy Commissioner of the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, who asked me today to do this presentation on her behalf. Just to start off, just to give you a background, South Africa as a country has committed to the COP26 agreement, which has a specific focus on reducing carbon emissions. The Presidential Climate Committee is overseeing the work of the country toward an effective climate change response and pathways to low carbon, climate resilient economy and society. On the back of this, the National Treasury has published a paper on financing a sustainable economy. And the result of this paper was the establishment of the Climate Risk Forum, which has a number of working groups, and in that working groups, we've interacted with many different organizations like BASA, the CIEFSA, the JSE. So we haven't gone in this alone as regulators. We have decided to make this a kind of industry commitment with the climate risk focus. The Climate Risk Forum is a financial sector forum to discuss deliberate influence and intervene in respect of climate-related risk matters. There's a number of working groups that has been established, namely the Taxonomy Working Group, the Disclosures Working Group, Sustainable Finance Instruments, Benchmark Scenario, and Capacity Building. The working group that I have the major influence is in the Benchmark Working Group, where we work with specific scenarios and stress testing. It's kind of very technical work where we discuss stresses that will affect the environment. And I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize in sub-Saharan Africa is that we've actually bypassed the 3-degree mark in terms of the temperature increase. And I'm sure if you guys read articles about climate risk, and you would have seen that there's this 3-degree mark, where people say that's where the point where climate risk will affect the Earth, and there's kind of no going beyond that point where nothing can be helped. But sub-Saharan Africa, in fact, is gone past that 3-degree mark. So when we create these stresses now, it's in the climate of climate change that already happened in our region. The Disclosure Working Group, I'm the co-chair of the Disclosure Working Group as well. Recently we've produced a paper on the principles and guidance of minimum disclosure, and we've worked very closely with the industry when we've created this. Some of the challenges we've had in creating this paper is that when it comes to disclosure, it can be very technical. Companies really want us to get into detail in the way we actually describe these disclosures. So something as simplistic as, say, the amount of solid waste an institute produces. It can be measured on varying degrees, so there's not a consistent way of measuring it. So to use that example, they want us regulators to be very specific in the way we go about detailing these disclosures. The JSE has had similar issues with industry as well to defining what these disclosures are. Industry also requires us to have a very a template almost in which we ask them to disclose information. So they don't want regulators to have a certain methodology now and then we change it in 3 months' time. That kind of creates a lot of expense for people who actually are disclosing this information. So they want us to be quite consistent in the way we go about doing this. The Sustainable Finance Working Group. The Sustainable Finance Working Group was established in 2020, and the objective was to map out the universe of sustainable finance instruments and products globally with reference to relevant enabling environments and prevailing norms. They've also produced a paper, the Draft Sustainable Finance Handbook for South Africa. The Taxonomy Working Group. A green taxonomy is an official classification or catalogue that defines a minimum set of assets, projects, and sectors that are eligible to be defined as green or environmentally friendly. The purpose of the working group is to develop a taxonomy for green, social, sustainable finance initiatives for the South African financial services industry. They've also created a document called the South African Green Finance Taxonomy, and this is published on the National Treasury website for sustainable finance. The Capacity and Competency Working Group, it identifies gaps in the current skill sets of target audience on the aspects listed. Develop a repository of open source relevant training material and programs. And also the Capacity and Working Group has produced a paper and can also be found on the Sustainable Finance Initiative website. Internally, within the FSCA, we've also created a committee, the Climate Change Forum, which was established as a coordinating and information sharing platform. And as you can see, almost every department within the FSCA is representative on this forum as well. Internally to the Prudential Authority, to National Treasury, they also have their own internal forums as well, which feeds into the Climate Risk Forum. As you can see, the body of work that the regulators are busy with, and you can see it's quite substantial. The work's ongoing. There's a lot of resources and money that has been put into this from the regulators. So I think it shows the effort that the regulators have made towards the initiative of climate risk. The development of certain instruments is most pressing for South Africa's economic transformation. As you can see, there are several instruments that are there: carbon offsets, grants, use of proceeds, listed equities, and it's instruments with high potential for catalyzing a wide variety and scale. I will skip on a few slides here, just for the purposes of time. You can probably read it on the website. Just to touch on, again, some of the work that has been done, scenarios and benchmarking work that we've done. The climate-related risks impact the financial system, physical and transitional risks. That means that physical risks are things like you've seen as the floods in KZN, which is very fast and impacting. And transition risks are normally something that's very slow, like rising sea levels and droughts. Transition risks arise from the transition to a low carbon economy and its effects on the value of assets and liabilities, as well as income flows. Physical risks result from growing severity and frequency of climate-related incidents such as extreme weather events. This is my last slide, and it's quite a telling slide. And if you actually look at the floods that recently happened in KZN, and you could probably trace the physical risk aspect here. And as South Africans, we might not, depending on where we live, we might not think this really affects us. But if you can see from this diagram, if you actually trace the physical risks to the macro impact and the micro impact, and you actually look at the financial risk implications of credit risk, market risk, underwriting risk, you will realize that like a flood in KZN can affect the whole of South Africa in varying ways. It can affect your pension fund portfolios, it can affect your banking, it can affect your insurance and how the stresses on insurance impacts your policies. So you cannot think of climate risk as something that just happens regionally and doesn't affect you. It will eventually affect you in a way, whether it's in a direct way or an indirect way. It would definitely impact you in a certain way in South Africa as a whole. So just to, the last message I would like to portray is that it's something that's really important to the regulators. This is the future. We've invested time, resources, creating individual departments, educating people about climate risk. Thank you very much for your time, and if you have any questions, I'll be in the audience and you can ask any questions you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shreelin Naicker, for the presentation. And please, for all of the panelists as well, if you do have any questions or questions that do pop up in your mind during the presentations, please jot it down, as there will be a Q&A at the end of all 5 presentations. I now hand over to Moulana, Bilal, and Jakhura.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المصطفى أما بعد. The topic of regulation, sustainability, Islamic finance and the sustainable developmental goals. I would like to, my perspective on this is just to cover a little bit with regards to the natural alignment between the SDGs and Sharia objectives. I think this has been highlighted previously, but perhaps some other perspectives around this. And then the critical role and opportunity for Islamic economy participants with regards to the SDGs. Just to discuss a little bit around some of the contemporary initiatives in regulation sustainability. A lot of work is being done. I must say, I must thank the organizers of this conference that I was not aware of a lot of the things that were being done, and this event was actually an impetus for me to actually read up and see the amazing work that's being done by organizations like CIEFSA, etc. And then perhaps to end off on certain recommendations arising from this deliberation. So when one reads through the SDGs, it stands out, right, that they automatically align with Islamic principles, and perhaps they align with principles, ethical, moral principles of many other faiths out there. Elimination of poverty, zero hunger, achieving good health, good quality education, aspects around gender equality, ensuring that gender violence, etc., is rooted out, and the list goes on. The perspective that I would like to share and start off by is a saying of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, which really puts it into context, that when we speak about the ethical considerations of the outcome, it goes deeper than just regulation. It's actually informed by our value system, by our very objective in life. And this hadith is narrated in Tirmidhi. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لن تزول قدم عبد يوم القيامة حتى يسأل عن خمس عن عمره فيما أفناه وعن شبابه فيما أبلاه وعن ماله من أين اكتسب وفيما أنفقه وماذا عمل فيما علم. So in summary, it means that on the day of judgment, as Muslims, we believe Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that we will be asked 5 questions. Perhaps if one could sum it up as the exam that we have to answer and the very objective of our life. Out of those 5 questions, the first being, how did you spend your time in general? How did you use your life? How did you use your youth? But 2 out of the 5 questions deal with economic aspects of our lives. Economic aspects. How did you earn your money? Whether that be at an individual level, at an organizational level, at a national, at an international, global level, economic activity, how did it happen? What was the context of it happening? وَفِيمَا أَنْفَقَ, and how was the spend of that? And I recall when we were studying under Shaykh Taqi Uthmani in one event, he started off explaining, saying that, look, one is the legal, and this has also received a lot of attention. Focus on the legal aspects with regards to Islamic compliance, or we might call it regulation. But he said there's a moral dimension that is inherent to all of our economic activity. And he summarized it very nicely in a term that perhaps will stick with all of us here, because we're so used to measuring everything in numbers, as Professor Small said earlier. But he said there's a measure that we need to adopt in our economic activity, and that is the measure of ROIH. The measure of ROIH. Now we all are familiar with ROI, return on investment. But he says Islamic economic principles dictate that we measure the effectiveness, or we measure the element of ROIH, which is return on investment in the hereafter. So when economic resources, wants and needs are unlimited, right? The resources are limited. So when we're making those decisions should be informed by what is the ROIH. Now whether that be at an individual, at an organizational, or even at a national or global level. So when it comes to the maqasid of the Sharia, we can see that they are very much aligned with bringing benefit to mankind and preventing harm from humankind. And the SDGs are simply another blueprint to help us achieve a better sustainable future for all. So in that context, leveraging off the dimensions that are incorporated in the SDGs and bringing that into our regulatory frameworks or into the checklist that we use as Islamic financial practitioners, this is something that will bring benefit. Another important point that is relevant is that Islamic finance currently constitutes 2.5 trillion and is expected to reach close to $4 trillion US. So it has a very, very significant role to play. The reports by the UK IFC, which has done a fantastic effort in the form of 4 different reports that have been published with regards to Islamic initiatives, whether it's social or financial initiatives, and the role that has to be played by participants in the Islamic economy. They note that approximately 5 to 7 trillion US dollars are going to be required every year to achieve the SDGs. And these funds will not be available from governments or donor agencies. Similarly, as far as Islamic Development Bank member countries go, they will require significant resources. which will represent around 40% of the total global SDG financing gap. Developing countries alone are expected to require 2.5 to 3 trillion per year for food security, basic infrastructure, health, education, and climate change. So again, it's about choices, it's about realizing where capital has to be prioritized. It's about the prioritization of capital. Upon analyzing some of the initiatives that are there, the initiatives that exist in terms of regulation sustainability are initiatives like the Principles for Responsible Banking, Principles for Responsible Insurance, Principles for Responsible Investment. One is, by no means are we saying these are necessarily comprehensive, but they are great initiatives. And Islamic financial institutions and organizations should participate in these excellent initiatives. The report found that only 1% of the 3,500 signatories on the PRI were based within the OIC countries. So again, there is a need to raise awareness with regards to participation by Islamic financial institutions in these initiatives that are ongoing and very beneficial in order to integrate the SDG, the achievement of SDGs within their individual strategies. So in terms of some thoughts as far as the way forward, there is a need to continue raising awareness of the role of the Islamic economy in contributing to achieving the SDGs, especially in OIC countries and also in Muslim minority countries like South Africa. Islamic financial institutions should actively participate in sustainability initiatives like the program for Principles of Responsible Investment, Principles for Responsible Banking. Again, there may be other dimensions which these documents or these programs and frameworks don't incorporate. Like, for example, we've spoken about the spiritual aspect, right? But this is still a positive start that should be taken forward and enhanced using our other Islamic principles that we measure. Aligning economic activity to positive and sustainable outcomes is necessary for all members of society. And I want to emphasize this, that this is including small businesses, individuals, not only governments, businesses, banks, and financial institutions. It starts from every single one of us. That when we are spending, keep conscious, keep in our mind those 5 questions that we have to answer, and 2 out of those 5, 40% deal with our economic activity. So whatever economic activity I am personally engaged in, how do I fix that? I remember a small anecdote, and I'll take the liberty to share it because it is, although it's simple, but it's profound. We had a speaker that came to, when we were kids at school, and he said that I was doing some work, trying to focus on getting my work done, and my little child was bothering me every now and again. So he said, I took a picture of the world map and I tore it up into a few pieces and I gave it to him. He's a 6-year-old child. He might take a good while to fit that puzzle together. And lo and behold, within a few moments, the child was back with the entire world map put together, with the entire world put together. So he was astonished and he asked the child, he said, how did you do this? He says, no, it wasn't, nothing extraordinary or remarkable about it. There was a human being at the back of it. There was a picture of a man. And I just put the man together and the entire world came together. So this is where it starts from. It starts from regulation, sustainability, starts from realizing that it's not just a regulation as though it's part of our value system. It's part of what we have to answer for and part of our objectives in life. Some other recommendations, I think, is that some major economic alternatives or options should be tracked by sustainability and the ROIH scorecard, which I'm going to coin that term. And organizations like IOFI, the Islamic Development Bank, IFSB, and others. Today we heard about the central bank in Malaysia that's doing amazing work. I mean, some of it is just it's astounding, the degree to which has been reached, but there needs to be collaboration on providing economic participants with simple checklists to guide economic activity, because then it will be something that starts right from the grassroots. So in conclusion, as much as we may term the word regulation, but in actual fact this is part of our value system. It is nothing that needs to be imposed. It should be inherently motivated. And we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that on the day that we have to answer those questions with regards to how did we earn and how did we spend, we should be able to provide answers that get us through with flying colors. Shukran.
I thank Moulana Bilal, Jakhura for that very thought-provoking presentation. And again, if you have any questions, please jot them down and it will be answered during the Q&A session. We now call upon Sheikh Dr. Saeed Mikail. He will be presenting a paper on the role of Sharia governance in inclusive and sustainable finance. فليتفضل مشكور.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for organizing this very important event and also in this very strategic place. As we hear in the morning session, that Cape Town is a very strategic place for business. And inshallah, I'm going to share the role of Sharia governance in terms of moving or pushing forward the sustainable finance. Okay, this is the content. And I will not focus more on this preliminary thought because alhamdulillah, with all this presentation that we have been hearing in the morning, so we have gained a lot about some sort of background about Sharia. I'm going to jump into the Sharia in the context of Islamic finance. The slide you have, the slide you read the previous part of the slide because of time constraint. So when we are talking about Sharia from Islamic finance point of view, so we are talking of 2 points. One is Sharia compliance and the other one is Sharia governance. But if we put it together also, we can still say that everything is within Sharia governance, because the role of Sharia governance is to ensure the Sharia compliance of Islamic financial institutions. So when we are talking about Sharia compliance, actually there was a notion in the beginning around 2010 with regard to Sharia compliance, whereby some people feel that if a product is Sharia compliant, it's not that deep enough as Sharia based. So what they mean by that is that Sharia compliance is just a mere mimicking conventional products in Islamic finance entities, in Islamic finance institutions. So on the opposite side, you have a Sharia-based product, that a product that is originally based on Sharia. And there are two views with regard to that concept, but I'm not going to emphasize on this because this is a bit technical. I think what is important is to know that when we are talking about Sharia compliance, we are talking about the compliance of businesses, operations, products, affairs of Islamic financial institution with Sharia requirement, and which is also the role of Sharia governance to play, because they have to put in place several policies, processes, procedures in order to ensure that the role of board of director is not just about what you are bringing at the end of the day. It's about the compliance with Sharia as well. And also the role of Sharia committee and the management when it comes to Sharia matters affecting Islamic financial institutions. So coming to Sharia compliance function, so I just want to highlight the Sharia governance standard of IOFI number 9 that provide definition of what is Sharia compliance. It says that Sharia compliance is the mechanism of ensuring compliance of Islamic financial institutions, arrangements, contract, transaction with Sharia principles and rules. And when we look at it, it's a bit difficult to comprehend what they mean by Sharia principles and rules, because Sharia principles and rules are very subjective to the interpretation of different scholars. So that's why they provide in paragraph 3K that what they are referring to with regard to Sharia principles and rules here is the Sharia standard of IOFI, and the current version is Sharia standard 2017. So, which is available. You can download it if you go to IOFI website. So that they must comply with the Sharia standard of IOFI, and also whatever any regulation, policy document, directives of their respective regulator, they have to also comply with it, including the resolution of Sharia committee at the regulatory level, followed by the resolution of Sharia committee within the Islamic financial institution, and also relevant financial accounting standard of IOFI. So this is in order to make it clear that when they are talking about Sharia principles here and rules, they are referring to these 4 or 5 points. So in order to make it clear. So this is Sharia compliance. So who is responsible for Sharia compliance? 3 people. Number 1, board of directors. Number 2, Sharia committee. Number 3, the management itself. So I'm going to relate this with regard to the aspect of sustainability. So, and also another point that I would like us to take note of it is that Sharia compliance in some jurisdictions, for example in Malaysia, is not just only about defined rules. It is also about statutory requirements, because there are statutory provisions of ICFSA 2013 in Malaysia that talk about compliance with Sharia. So section 28 says that an institution must comply with Sharia in all of their business affairs operations. They have to comply. with the Sharia. And they further clarify that compliance with the resolution of Sharia Advisory Council, compliance with the Sharia Advisory Council of Central Bank of Malaysia is also considered as compliance with the Sharia. So, okay, let me move to the sustainability commitment. So when we are talking about sustainability, one point that I would like to highlight is that even the sustainability itself is something that is very subjective. That's why it's required to look into it from Sharia perspective as far as Islamic finance is concerned. So when we are talking about sustainability commitment, in order to ensure that we ensure that Islamic financial institutions, they are committed with the Sharia, I think one of the aspects that we need to look into is these three people that I said that they are responsible for the Sharia compliance. So especially Sharia committee. As you can see here, one of the point that Bank Negara Malaysia highlighted is that commitment towards sustainability practice reflects the bank's ethical practice in operation and are in compliance with the Sharia, with principle of Muqasid Sharia. So, in addition to that, when we are talking about Islamic financial institutions, the major aspect that make them different from that of conventional is ethical foundation that they have, product and also governance. And who is going to provide this ethical foundation? They are the Sharia committee. Or who is going to provide guidance? They are the Sharia committee. And if you look at the governance also, so that also includes, as I highlighted in the case of Sharia governance system, so it also involves Sharia committee who will be looking into the Sharia compliance. In terms of literature also, you can see that the literature also confirms that there is a positive relationship between Sharia committee and sustainability practices. So that shows that there is inherent relationship between sustainability and Sharia compliance. So especially if you look at Hashim 2015, whereby it said that the Sharia committee that will be providing independent opinion for the compliance of Islamic financial institution, they bring into the institution ethical and moral consideration that are based on Maqasid Sharia. So, and that Maqasid Sharia is the forces that driving the sustainability commitment as far as Islamic finance is concerned. In terms of justification, there are several verses in the Quran, but two verses that I would like to ask us to refer to is that there are one verse in Surah Al-Mudaththir, I think around 37 in Surah Al-Mudaththir, and also in Surah Al-A'raf, if you look at verse 56. In Surah Al-Mudaththir, Almighty Allah said that لِمَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يَتَقَدَّمَ أَوْ يَتَأَخَّرَ. If you look at the definition of sustainability, is to keep moving forward. So, and the Quran is talking to us that فَمَنْ شَاءَ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يَتَقَدَّمَ أَوْ يَتَأَخَّرَ. If you want, you move forward. So, which means if you stay, it's like you want to move backward. So we have to continue moving. So the Quran enjoins us to keep moving, to keep developing. So, and also in Surah Al-A'raf, verse 6, وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا. I consulted several tafsir, and one of the very good tafsir is tafsir Ibn Qayyim, and also tafsir Al-Baqai, Ibn Hayyan, Al-Bahr al-Muhit. So what they are trying to say is that وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, don't make any mischievous on land. type of mischievous. And they try to connect it with the 5 fundamental values of Maqasid al-Sharia that we have. So that's why I was, so that's why in my conclusion, I was saying that in order to ensure sustainability, so based on inherent value that we see now, based on the literature review and also justification in the Quran and Sunnah also, because I don't want to take our time, so we need to work together. And if we need to work together, there is a need for standardization. Of course, when we are talking about standardization, that must be at different level, at the global level, at the level of OIC, FICE Academy, IOFI, and other standard setting bodies at global level. So, and also we need standardization at regional level as well. For example, you have a GCC, you have Southeast Asia, especially in the case of Malaysia and their neighboring countries. Also in Africa here, so we need to have collaboration in terms of reaching the standardization of the approach that we wanted to use in terms of ensuring sustainability of Islamic finance, which is based on Maqasid al-Sharia. And if we look at the presentation of Mr. Raja from HSBC Amana, so we can see that it is a means in order to put Maqasid al-Sharia into operation. We can see that in his presentation that Maqasid is the aims. So which means another dimension of looking into SDG is to have Maqasid al-Sharia, especially 5 fundamental values, deen, nafs, which is life, and also aql, intellect, and also nasab, progeny, lineage, and also man, wealth. So if you have these 5 categories, of course they don't mention deen in the SDG, but I don't want to go to that aspect. But one thing that I wanted to say is that, is there any community without any religion, whether it is Islam or non-Islam? No. So this is something that is very essential and very sensitive. So that protection of this is very important. And that's why even in Sharia, the Sharia gives us, and in fact even the Quran also gives us a provision to recognize other religions. وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. Don't abuse those who they are worshipping other than Allah. So which means it's a form of recognition of that there is other religion beside Islam. So the point here is that when we have these 5 categorization as the main objective, then we will have means in order to achieve it based on the SDG. And apart from standardization, we need to harmonize whatever any differences, because we know the issue of industry, we have a different perspective, but still we need to harmonize in terms of our policy, in terms of products, in order to reach the same goal. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
barakatuh. We thank Sheikh Dr. Shahid Mikail for the beautiful providing speech and presentation. The actual speech and presentation is many more pages, but I had to focus on the main highlights. So inshallah, if you need to speak to concerning any other aspects as well as the other panelists, inshallah, during the tea breaks, inshallah, you can make use of that. And there will be a plus minus 15-20 minute Q&A immediately after the last panelist. Inshallah, without any further ado, we go on to the next panelist, and that is now Maheerah Gamieldien Mohamed. And she will be presenting a discussion on, it says here, a discussion on the role of and developments in Islamic financing as a growing source of finance for organizations, explaining the rationale for its use and identifying its benefits and deficiencies. Without any further ado, I hand over to Maheerah Gamieldien Mohamed.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am honored to be standing here before such an esteemed room full of experts and scholars. So it is again an honor and a privilege for me. So I will start. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. As the moderator pointed out, the brief for my discussion today, I tried to align with the panel discussion, which is around regulation, sustainability, and Islamic finance. My paper, again, is a bit long. I think I will leave out some parts of it because I think my previous speakers covered those adequately, and I will not go over those again, particularly around the Sharia governance areas. But I will be looking at the role of and development in Islamic finance as a growing source of finance, not only for organizations, but also for individuals. And again, mine is a critical analysis. My name is Maheerah, and I stand here before you to talk about the perspective of the entrepreneur and the regulated, rather than coming from a position of a regulator or an expert on Sharia. So as we address the pertinent issues across the Islamic finance industry, including the technical aspects of Islamic banking, capital markets, insurance, and so on, we do need to look at whether the architecture that we are creating as Muslims supports the Islamic way of doing things. Because we have to agree, and I think everyone in this room today agree, that there is a specific way of doing things in Islam which is different from any other society that exists today. So our focus should actually be on how the SDGs align with the Maqasid al-Sharia, how the SDGs align with our higher objectives, rather than how we fit in with the SDGs. I know this might be a matter of semantics, and some people might explain that away as such, but I would like to argue that this is a key cultural shift that could actually strengthen the ethical structure around an Islamic financial global system. So this ecosystem needs to be seen from that angle, and this paradigm shift is very important because it allows us then to introduce our unique spiritual aspects, as many of the speakers mentioned before, into what is increasingly becoming a format that is being superimposed on particularly emerging and developing nations. So as tempting as it is again to, let's go into the presentation, let's see what I have here. Okay. So as tempting as it is to revel in the complexity of the Islamic financial instruments, as many of the experts in the room have elucidated on today, I think that up to now the stock response from Sharia experts is frankly not acceptable for the layperson. It is in fact probably very dismissive to just say something is either Sharia compliant or something is not Sharia compliant. And I think the whole aim of the Sharia is actually to demystify products, to demystify Islam, and to make accessible the tools of this wealth that we talk about here today to all Muslims, and not only to Muslims, because as we know and has been clearly pointed out, is that less than 10% of Muslims in South Africa actually use Islamic banking products, number one. Number two, 24% sorry, let's go back to my paper. Before I start giving it. So more than 20% of and even bigger opportunity here is that more than 20% of South Africans are still unbanked, number one. Almost 45% of Southern Africans and Asians in developing economies are unbanked. And I think these statistics were shared here this morning as well. And this high concentration can be broken down further, looking at so many unbanked people who are so confused by all these products that are being thrown at them. So I think, frankly, the ulama will have to simplify it rather further. So as an entrepreneur and researcher, being Muslim and being a professional is not mutually exclusive. And as a South African, creating this enabling infrastructure to support this new Islamic global financial ecosystem is very important. It is an enabling architecture that will allow one to practice one's beliefs. And this is outside the constraints of what we say the SDGs are. If the SDGs don't suit our belief system as Muslims, then we need to look at how we include our infrastructure as part of that. So how do we as Muslims manage this design and development is critical. And I think we've gathered enough minds and knowledge in this room and around the table to actually do that. So I'm hoping that this presentation today will provide, from my point of view, a critical analysis of some of these issues that we grapple with, and look at some of the macroeconomic implications, and look at some of the new solutions that have been suggested. And I'm glad that Sister Yasmina earlier did actually refer in her presentation to whether we should fit in with the SDGs, or the SDGs should fit in with the Islamic global system. So in another paper where I explored similar themes, and this is the segue to this paper, I looked at the impact of regulation, governance, and standardization on the halal global economy, in fact. And I argued that there would be unintended consequences for many local Muslim communities around the world, particularly in minority countries like ours, with a piecemeal adoption of halal codes or Sharia compliant or Sharia based advices. This will, on one hand, in a very small fashion, it will lead to a loss of our cultural markers, of our spirituality in terms of how we practice our day-to-day Islam. And one needs to look no further for models than, for example, like the fair trade model that we know about, which is an all-encompassing, systematic way of doing things. So highlighting and emphasizing the tayyib aspects along with contractual aspects, perhaps, will begin to grow a complementary halal system or Sharia-based system, as opposed to a reverse-engineered or even a side-by-side system. In other words, we need to create space for thinking about halal and Sharia compliance as a measure of integrity and fair trade, rather than an alternative. We also need to be cognizant of the fact that a system run by people, like possibly the people in this room, who have an ideological affinity to the ideals being espoused by Islamic finance, have a better chance of being successfully adopted by the broader public. Just to continue, I'd like to quote here, and I believe she is still in the room, is that at the first BASA, the Islamic conference, the managing director, Mohamed, stated unequivocally that these challenging times demand something different from all of us. And I think she said this in a South African context. A lot of what is required can be found in the fundamental tenets of Islamic banking: fairness, transparency, risk sharing, and socioeconomic responsibility. Islamic banking services are open to all, regardless of faith. So it is vital that this conference, and she was referring to the first one that they were holding, is to accelerate the growth of Islamic banking and its ethics and values in South Africa today. And I know we use many global examples, and I think we take guidance from these international models. But I think South Africa is also cited as one of the leading Islamic finance examples for other countries as well. Again, I'm not sure whether following a regulatory system suggested by BASA is the way to go, but I think it is definitely important that we use home-based and homegrown models for this. And BASA, through this Islamic banking subcommittee, will, they say, craft a Sharia conduct standard, which is being considered right now for deliberation. I think most important for me, what I took out of that was, and again, we're talking just not about regulators, about Sharia consultants, but we're also talking about the regulated, which means everybody else around here. So again, I spoke about that. So Homo economicus versus Homo Islamicus, and I hope that we're all going to be Homo Islamicus in this respect. Again, I will skip over this. I did have something on Sharia supervisory boards as well, but I think that the brother earlier adequately covered that better than what I would. Just to conclude, so it can be seen, and I think we've spoken, many of our previous speakers have spoken about it, is that much work has been done looking at sustainability globally. But I think much work still has to be done on standardization and governance and regulation, particularly with regards to the customer fairness aspect. South Africa, I think, would be an ideal hub for emerging and developing nations, so that we don't compete with larger nations like the United Kingdom or even the Gulf countries in terms of capital. This would allow smaller developing nations, of which Muslim countries make up a huge percentage, to take advantage of these developments, advancements and facilities. And I think Moulana Faraz earlier on spoke about a growth strategy, looking at harnessing and linking the various chains, the value chain within Islamic finance, in social finance, development finance, and so on. So like Haris Irfan, who wrote in his book, Heaven's Bankers, because as Muslims interested in Islamic finance, this is our role. We are to create a bank not for this world, but also for the year after. So Heaven's Bankers, I think that the Islamic finance industry has to be one that caters to both small and medium-sized enterprises, individuals like retail customers, the man in the street, and offers something beneficial to everyone, irrespective of creed. So despite the fact that we are meant to be Heaven's Bankers, or planning a highway to heaven for all of us, we need to be focusing on making it accessible to all who need to be banked. Thank you so much. Shukran.
Maheerah, Hamid and Mohamed, to that presentation. I'm sure you have a number of questions. Inshallah, we can do that for later. We now call upon Mr. Shahid Daniels, and he will also be presenting, and he is from the South African Institute of Professional Accountants. So without any further ado, I hand over to Mr. Shahid Daniels.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay. Can I ask you to all stand up? It's a graveyard shift. I'm serious. Can we get up? Is still another session after this? I think it's graveyard shift, so just stretch ourselves. It's an important session after this. Shukran, taking your seat. Shukran very much. Good afternoon as well. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala asrafil mursalin. Sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa Moulana Mohamedin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa barik wa sallim. Colleagues, firstly, thank you for inviting me to talk on the subject. My topic is going to be more focused on the accountancy profession. And what does sustainability, what does regulation and Islamic finance mean, and bring the three topics together into one. I'll try to catch up. I see I've only got 10 seconds left in my presentation. Okay. Sustainability is tend to be a term that is used, sometimes abused, and it seems to be a fashion thing. So we sometimes take it out of context. Sometimes we see it as a talk show, or what does it really mean? Does it have a cohesive approach in the different jurisdictions? And how will we implement sustainability practices, monitor it, and also measure it to determine the impact on climate, on business, as well as society. However, sustainability is not limited to climate change or to ESG. Sustainability is much more than that. If you look at the global economy, the SME sector of the global economy is really the engine rooms, the heart of the economies of all jurisdictions. And if we take the SME sectors within the economies of the respective countries, for them, how does sustainability affect them? Because the question is really being asked for SMEs, survival versus sustainability. Which one comes first? Chicken or the egg? Egg or the chicken? In regulation, we have got different models. Depends on the jurisdiction. And sometimes it is a compliance notice that we have to comply. In the profession of the accountancy profession, I looked at 3 big major models. I looked at the external regulation, which means you are governed by an act of parliament. You have self-regulation, which is a voluntary regulation by a business, organization, or professional bodies. And then we have self-regulation with external oversight. And that is a hybrid between the first two, in terms of where you are, the body is being governed by an act of parliament, but its members is not being governed, or the client is not being governed by the act of parliament. In Islamic finance, I'm not an expert on this topic at all, but as from my limited knowledge, that risk sharing is the cornerstone in Islamic finance. In my opinion, is not widely marketed. There's not enough educational awareness about it, especially in the West. And I also want to acknowledge IConsult for having this conference to let us be further educated on this topic. And as one of the speakers have said earlier today, it's a credible alternative to the West. As I say, I'm going to focus on the accountancy profession, and IFAC stands for International Federation of Accountants, which are the global voice for the accountancy profession. Obviously, that's excluding IOFI at this point of time. When we talk about sustainability from an IFAC perspective, which is the mother body for the global accountancy profession, we talk about, and we have recently established the ISSB, the International Sustainable Standards Board, under the banner of the IFRS Foundation based in the UK. And we have now 2 types of boards in terms of reporting: the Accounting Standards Board and the Sustainability Standards Board. And it is believed that the accountancy profession must take lead on sustainability per se, on climate reporting, and any other ESG disclosure requirements, including assurance, which means auditing. And the purpose thereof is to ensure the enabling environment for the SDGs of the United Nations. They talk about, and I'm not going to go through all the details, but from a time perspective, the actions, how they see themselves in making this happen. They want to advocate for smart, sustainable, related policy making a regulation environment. They want to adopt the integrated mindset, and some of us in the corporate world talk about integrated reporting and integrated thinking. How do we adopt that? And also being proactive, complying with the existing standard setters requirements. Now we have already the fragmented sustainability and or regulations. In the States it is SASB, Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, and in Europe we have IFC, and they've just merged into the Value Reporting Foundation, and say they have already started with some standards, and so we can start use that to assist the ISSB, and also demonstrate some sustainable skills and competencies for those who are going to make sure that we are reporting on sustainability in a regulatory environment. I'm not going to go through these 2, I'm just going to deal with the first 2 points there. Accelerated sustainability. What we're trying to do there is to fast track this whole concept of sustainability, and obviously avoiding regulatory fragmentation. However, that's not going to happen because it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and each one, they're going to try to do it, but I don't think it's going to happen. I just recently read an article, and this is just a summary of the article. Was published on the 31st of March by Professor Sanjay Bangat, so Professor of Finance, where he says, investing in sustainable funds that prioritize ESG goals is supposed to help improve the environmental, social sustainability of business practice. Unfortunately, close analysis suggests that it is not only not making much difference to companies' actual ESG performance, but also actually be directing capital into poor performance or poor business performance. So isn't this now also the lead for us to look at regulation? And what is the type of regulation that we need to look at? Because we can't just willy-nilly invest in ESG projects for the sake of investing in ESG initiatives. Again, fragmented, the European Commission has just recently drafted technical standards for the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulations, SFDR, apologies, and they want to have adopted these technical standards to be used by financial market participants. They don't say everybody, it's those who participate in this financial market participants to disclose sustainability related information. And it will cover and specifies what is the content, how you must disclose it, the methodology, and how you have to present that information. And these financial market participants must provide detailed information about how they tackle and reduce any possible negative impacts. Then, obviously, it will help to assess the sustainability performance. This is just work in progress for now. It still needs to go to the European Parliament and Council, but the intention is to adopt this regulatory environment by the 1st of January 2023. Now, Mazars is also a professional accountancy firm, and they have also taken their own cues by saying, what does sustainability mean in a regulatory environment? I'm just going to, the 5 questions is being asked there, I'm not going to go into the detail thereof, but as we could see that global regulations are divided. Sustainability regulations are not shared internationally, each one do their own. And how is that going to benefit not only the world, but the respective jurisdictions? And this is the 5 questions that they have put themselves, they've answered it themselves. I'm not going to go through all the answers because it's not important at this point of time. How do we push it for incorporation of sustainability into business operations and ESG reporting? How can ESG funding the gap to be breached? And how can government incentives be balanced with regulatory actions such as tax incentives or tax incentive possibly to adopt ESG environments, and also how will it be regulation impact companies during their path of sustainable growth. Now, there is this myth about regulation that it's a burden, it's administrative, and that's why companies are shying away from it. Okay, but these are the questions that's currently in the market that we need to answer. This paper is an old paper, it's a research paper of 2015, and much has been said about it already, and I'm not going to go into the detail thereof. But the message for me in this research paper by these learned scholars, it's from Malaysia, and we heard a lot about Malaysia, and where the paper is acknowledging that Malaysia, a regulatory and supervisory framework for Islamic finance, is one of the best models in the world with the respective legislations. And the paper was attempting to examine the efficacy and the evolving Malaysian regulatory and supervisory framework, attempt to contribute to the knowledge building. Remember, I talk about the education aspect of Islamic finance. Here we talk about knowledge building blocks. And then the findings came out there is that unintentionally there was a misalignment in incentives and discourages Islamic banks from fully embracing risk sharing. And then the other finding was to reconfigure the regulatory system to promote more of risk sharing. I believe lots of work has been done subsequent to this. The purpose why is this important is to show that it's ongoing. There's a reflection where we are, where we're going to, what still needs to be done, and how do we improve ourselves. And I think the Malaysian authorities have done a great job, and that's why they're the leading authority on Islamic finance. I'm going to conclude. As a professional accountancy body in South Africa, one of the second biggest in the country, and one of the big five on the African continent, will also contribute in playing its part with regards to Islamic finance. And we shall establish and develop skills, relationships, alliances, and collaborations with the broader Islamic finance industry, and more specific to the IOFI, for the professional development within the accountancy profession. We know there's another accounting body in the UK that has a course that they're doing a certificate in Islamic finance. I want to go beyond that, just that certificate. So SAIPA shall endeavor to facilitate collaboration between IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, the IFRS Foundation, which consists of the two standard setting boards, IASB and IASB, and IOFI. We shall also liaise with IOFI about standards to be incorporated in the Global Professional Accountancy Competency Framework and Curricula, which is a SAIPA's initiative to be part of the Global Village. And SAIPA and IOFI to consider to develop certificate courses on Islamic finance with a focus on sustainability and regulation. SAIPA would like to engage with the panel of this morning, the first panel. I know Shabir fairly well, and all the other colleagues for all the banks, the respective banking Islamic divisions, to meet with you and to see how can we work together in the best interest for Islamic finance, to create a further awareness and education about Islamic finance in South Africa and abroad. That's my penny's worth for this afternoon. I'll take any comments and questions, Mr. Moderator. I thank you very much. Shukran so much.
We thank Mr. Shahid Daniels for that presentation. And with that, basically, that brings us to the end of all presentations. I have been informed by the organizers that there won't be enough time for the questions and answers. However, that we can make use of the networking session at the end of the event, as well as the tea breaks to liaise with the panelists. So inshallah, what I will, however, do is I will grant each of the panelists 1 minute to give their closing comments. So I will start with Mr. Shreelin Naicker. He is from the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Listening to my fellow panelists, I think our job as regulators is to kind of think outside the box. Even the role of regulators have changed, and it's constantly changing. And it's something that I've incorporated in our own work, as well as the work of the FSCA. So we look forward to working with industry bodies and other associations to kind of expand our knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Moulana Bilal Shakur.
So I just want to emphasize again that the driving force for compliance with the moral principles that have been espoused and discussed, whether it be just limited to the SDGs or beyond that, it should be an inherent values-based system which is integral to our Islamic identity.
Jazakumullah khairan. We hand over to Sheikh Dr. Saeed Mikail from IConsult. Bismillah. Closing remarks.
No, from my perspective, I think we need to do more, especially with regard to synergy between different standard setting bodies for Islamic finance in the case of commitment or adoption of sustainability in the Islamic finance products, and also harmonization between different policies and also processes that we will be using for sustainability.
Shukran. Now I hand over to Maheerah Mohamed from World One Enterprises for final remarks.
I'd just like to emphasize a point that I might have made too clearly, is that the regulatory bodies need to be working hand in hand with marketing agencies, because if we do not get people to adopt and take on board Islamic products and Islamic banking and Islamic finance as a lifestyle option, then you will have nothing to regulate. So I think it's very important that we focus on advocacy, education, and lifestyle changes.
Shukran. Hand over to Mr. Shahid Daniels from the South African Institute of Professional Accountants.
My final remark is very simplistic. that Islamic finance as a credible alternative, and that the accountancy profession got a big role to play. And that's why it's important that the accounting bodies from Islamic perspective will meet with the West in order to come together and work together. And that the professional accountant's role in Islamic finance is to facilitate and coordinate the entire ecosystem of Islamic finance, as well as the value chain of the Islamic finance. Shukran very much.
Shukran. Can we give a final hand of applause for those presentations? Shukran. I conclude the session and hand over to the MC. Shukran.